welcome to this session. To this session with the title, A Bright Future Ahead, New Participatory Approaches to Strategy Foresight. And my name is Maria Isabel Wieser, and I'm the Vice Director of Foraus and the head of the Think Tank Hub, sorry. And so for those who haven't met Foraus before, we are a grassroots think tank, and our network consists of young academics and professionals and that create and disseminate policy solutions for foreign policy challenges. And we have one project, it's the Think Tank Hub, that's also partnering on this specific project. And that's a project that is in collaboration with the Department of Foreign Affairs in Switzerland, and which supports think tanks worldwide in accessing the international Geneva ecosystem and disseminates the work of international think tanks to decision makers. And first of all, I would like to thank OTT or On Think Tank for this great opportunity. As always, it's a real pleasure to work with On Think Tanks. We've had many years of collaborations already, and it's always just an amazing experience. And so for the title of the whole conference, it's a really interesting title. It's a really great title, I think, because Think Tanks and Change is also very timely. On one hand, because think tanks are affected by the change, of course, but also they are very dynamic, and they more dynamic maybe than other entities, and therefore can adapt easily to change. And so right now is really their time to shine. So I'm really looking forward to discuss in this session how we can do a positive change, and how to see. And I like to think that there is a great future ahead. And that's, without further ado, I would like to introduce Fanny Wailea. She is a project manager with Foraus, and she's going to lead you guys through this session today.
Thank you, Maria, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. A very warm welcome from my side as well. I'm very happy to moderate this session today and to see that, 23 people at least for now are following us. This is really cool. So at Foraus, we are forward-looking, I would say, and we always try to design new event formats and research methodologies in order to propose solutions and to trigger discussions on the challenges and opportunities of today and tomorrow. So lately, we've been experimenting foresighting methodologies through different projects, which is why we decided to host this session today on this topic. We think that strategic foresight as a way of using ideas about the future to anticipate and better prepare for change fits well in the overall topic of the conference, so think tanks and change. So this session will have two main parts. In the first part, we will listen to three presentations. And in the second one, you'll be able to try out strategic foresight yourself through a creative game called The Thing from the Future. Great, so let me now introduce our three speakers. We are very, very happy to have with us, first of all, Emily Munro, who is Head of Strategic Anticipation at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. Then we have with us Wailea Zuelch, who is Engagement Manager at Foraus and responsible for a strategic foresight project at Foraus as well. And finally, Andrina Frey, who is co-head of the migration program at Foraus. So thank you all for being with us today. We're really glad to have such great panelists. So before giving the floor to Emily, I would like to encourage all of you to ask your questions in the chat. The panelists will answer them either as they speak or at the end, depending on the time we have. We can also keep them for the end, whatever you prefer. And we would also be very glad to know who you are and where you're joining us from. So feel free to share some information about you in the chat if you want. Okay, so Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fanny. I'm Happy to open this session, and a warm thanks to the OTT conference and also for us in Switzerland for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you to Foraus for putting together such a program in this on Foresight at this conference. And it's an interactive session, so I'm going to speak to you about Foresight, but what I always like to say is it's not enough just to speak about it, you have to feel it and understand it. So I'm really glad you're going to have a chance with the participants to interact a little bit later in this session. So I've been asked to really get everyone up on the same page about what we're talking about if Foresight is new to you. Foresight, I would say, is really a key skill for actors to have in the environment that we're all operating in today. Take whatever descriptive buzzword you wish, uncertain or complex or turbulent. It can help us to navigate these times. The theme of this conference, as was just mentioned, is around change, and Foresight obviously fits really well here. So what is it? The process of looking beyond the present in order to better anticipate and plan for the future. There's something about considering, but also doing something about it, and that's a theme I'm going to come back to in my remarks. It's not about prediction, and it's inherently connected in the private sector or in the government policy-oriented sphere, where I'm mostly working to decision-making today. Otherwise, why invest the time? So it's not about eliminating surprise. Crisis will still occur. We need crisis managers, and the last year have obviously been an evidence of this. But it is about thinking about the future systematically, a type of sense-making exercise to think in different and new ways about the future, which can be also liberating. So it's not only a consideration of the future, but a shift today. So when we talk about foresight and futures, it is about the future, but it's as much about the present and today in many ways. What is inherent in this is the expression of agency, that the future doesn't just happen to us, but there's this ability to shape things as well. So inaction is something, an action, in itself. However, the future is fundamentally unknown, and today we have a high degree of this uncertainty and complexity. So Foresight addresses this by, one, structuring the conversation around the future to make it manageable, and to stressing alternative futures. So not one single future, but a range of options of futures. So you're going to, in Foresight, to start spelling futures with an S, which is a bit uncomfortable at first. I like to think about Foresight in 3 different dimensions, and that's how I've structured my remarks going forward. The mindset, the broader context or organizational context, but also the process and the methods. So first, developing a mindset of anticipation. This includes the possibility that the future could be quite different than today. So that means a stretching on issues and sources that we might be going to that are different. And also that means a bit of mental gymnastics in terms of time, where we're used to just thinking about maybe the present or the next couple of months or year, and dealing with the speed of change, because obviously there's quite a speed of change occurring in the world today. It's about embracing that complexity and maybe not shying away from it. But of course, there's mental limits. We have mental limits to thinking about the future. And that's related to, things like our negative or even positive bias that the future is always going to be rosy. We might also be focused on today and have a hard time thinking beyond today, and that the future is just more of what we're experiencing today. Or there could just be even a denial of something, a change occurring. We have a hard time talking about that within our own professional context. So my reflection question at the end of this session, section, the first section, is what would you say is today blocking you about thinking differently about the future personally, or what do you observe around you within your organization? So I want to wrap up this first part with just a quote, and this is by Peter Ho from Singapore, and he wrote once, "There must be built into plans and policies an expectation of change, a capacity to adapt to change, and a capacity to change." So this expectation of change, that is foresight and futures, what we're talking about today, this capacity to adapt to change, which is this other word that we use and hear quite a bit right now, is resilience. So moving with change, learning from the experiences we have. And this capacity to change. So this idea that you can take risk and experiment and innovate. I like this quote because it puts a bit of humility in what we're talking about today in strategic foresight, that actually there's other things going on around us in foresight that we need to connect to. Secondly, I want to speak about the skills for integrating futures thinking in a wider context, the environment where foresight takes place. This means reference to different techniques, complementary techniques that are very common and to different fields within the business sector, within organizations, on leadership or communication and collaboration to integrate strategic foresight in those working contexts that we're in. The OECD makes a strong case for this when asking the question, why use foresight in policy making? Well, they say it can help you better anticipate and prepare sooner. It can help you with policy innovation. I just mentioned innovation. And it can also help you future-proof or stress test things you're doing now or things you're thinking of doing. And of course, there's a large community around the world and many examples and people to reach out to on this. And that's something I want to stress in this part as well. In government, whether it be in Finland or in Singapore or in Canada, and within organizations as well. I mentioned the OECD, but the European Commission, obviously, NATO in the international security sphere where I'm working as well. There's a plurality of experiences, and that's the point I want to make here. There's no template or standard there. You must be owned by that organization and that setting. It could be more leadership or top driven in certain contexts, and it could be more in other parts. Like in Finland, there's a parliamentary committee of the future and regular reports coming out of that. So there's different approaches to this. I would argue there's some commonalities in importance of communication and high-level support to bring in that new thinking and obviously collaboration, both outside your organization with people outside to get in new perspectives, but also inside as well with different levels within your organization, different generations, and that inclusivity and getting different perspectives in. So my reflection question at the end of this section is what is most challenging for you of those things I've just listed about a future orientation in your own professional setting? It's probably different than somebody else's, so that's worth reflecting on. The third and last pillar I want to talk about is methods and process, because that's actually also where we're going to turn to next in the conversation here. Uncertainty can be overwhelming, so we use methods and structure and foresight to help us manage that uncertainty. And there's a variety of tools and methods out there for inclusion of foresight processes, many different characteristics of those, and not just one method. We often hear about scenarios in foresight, and there's a reason for that. They're common, they tell a story, they're compelling, and bring alive how change could occur. But there's other methods out there as well. In the interest of time, I'm just going to emphasize how important it is in the first steps in a foresight process to gather that information and think about the sources you're going to for your futures thinking, the broad perspectives you want to look at. You're probably going to want to go to different language sources. You hear I'm an English language mother tongue, so you want to think about this beyond just the different sources that you might go to on a regular basis, from a broad community and an open mindset to go beyond the trends we talk about, to pick up on what we call in foresight weak signals, those signs that something could be occurring, some change could be occurring, maybe beneath the surface, those emerging issues. Could be background noise at first, but when it connected to other pieces of information, it's really important to pick up on those things early. So the reflection question I ask at this end of this session is, what are those weak signals that you might already see coming up, and what can you talk and start discussing already with your own colleagues? So to engage in foresight, this broad participation is required to build that picture of how the future may evolve and could be very different than today. To undertake that search for weak signals and bring in all those different elements together. And I know that we're going to go to participatory techniques next, and that's going to be very interesting to connect to this question of methods and process. So just to end, 3 takeaways I'm going to leave you with in these short remarks is foresight's going to push you to adapt your mindset about how the future may unfold and start talking about future with an S, futures. It's going to push you to talk about things that are more, not just foresight, but to take into consideration that surrounding environment in the broader context. And it's also about what I like to say is this accessibility of the methods and the importance of process, but the ability with foresight also to make small changes and to think differently about how the future may unfold. So I'm going to end here and really thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to the discussion ahead.
Thank you very much, Emily. That was very insightful, especially the way you structured it in 3 parts. Yeah, very clear, especially for me, who is very new. Strategic foresighting. Thus, thanks you a lot. Do you have any questions? If you do, you can gladly write them in the chat or quickly join the moderation panel to ask it yourself as you like. If there is no question from your side, maybe I can ask one myself. So, Emily, would you, I mean, since you work at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, maybe it would be interesting for us to have an example of how do you use it in your field, in security, international security?
I can say a word about that, of course. We have used this for a number of years in our own organization and with our partners when we're working with governments or international organizations. And it's, of course, for ourselves, very interesting to ask ourselves the question, what are those emerging issues that we should be covering and working on and staying on top of those things in terms of our own policy analysis and what we're offering to our stakeholders. So there's obviously a self-reflective element to that. I would say that's been pushed in our field, especially in the international security field. We've been pushed to embrace and think about the range of different soft and hard security issues and broaden our perspective on where those different threats and challenges we focus on in the security world rather than the opportunities, etc. But that's important to think about how different emerging issues can come from different sources. So I think that's helped us to think about and reach out maybe to other communities, which is so necessary in the international security sphere right now. As we have new challenges related to technology, related to climate change and human security related issues. So I think that has really also brings a lot to the security field, and we see it being used in different contexts. I drew one example there in my remarks, but there's other ones as well where Foresight can bring a lot of added value to open up your perspective to how things could change actually really quite fundamentally in a number of different ways.
Thanks a lot, Emily. I suggest to all those who might have questions during the rest of this session to write them in the chat, and we also can take a few minutes at the end to answer them. Wailea, the floor is now yours if you want to continue.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Fanny. Thank you, OTT. I will actually just continue to exemplify why foresight is necessary, or as we see it, participatory strategic foresight. But maybe just to set the ground first. So foraus was born out of a play on words with the German word voraus. It's slightly differently spelled, but actually means looking ahead. And as Maria outlined, it's now since 11 years that young talents have tried to come up with innovative scientific-based policy recommendations to pressing foreign policy challenges of today. And our belief in collective intelligence is really central to our work with foraus. The involvement and participation in foraus is open to anyone. Actually, the success of our think tank is really based on a unique grassroots model. With our Policy Kitchen innovation platform, we enable a diverse network of thinkers to find creative policy solutions to pressing foreign policy challenges. The methodology is built on a crowd innovation platform, physical workshops, and a support process where the best recipes, that's how we call the output formats, are brought to bear a viable impact on foreign policy. We have developed a platform, we created our workshops along more traditional ideation lines. But over the past year or so, we have increasingly experimented with including strategic foresight components. For example, last fall, we have applied a positive-negative headlining methodology to ask a diverse group of students to imagine a positive or negative newspaper headline. It's a very simple visioning exercise on the question of how would the transformation in the way we work accelerate or mitigate the trend of individualization in our society. As an output, the students have developed 3 visions, which have then been published on the Foraus blog. We have had project along those lines on different topics. But actually at the moment we are in the midst of, to date, our most comprehensive strategic foresight process, where we envision the mobility, the human mobility for 2050 with dozens of participants and from across the globe in a series of workshops. So as Emily already said, there's no one template for strategic foresight. And I want to just quickly elaborate our template, which we brought or which we created to make it more participatory. And to exemplify it, I will explain you the process we came up with for this Future of Human Mobility project. So first of all, motivated to bring together as many diverse perspectives as possible, whether from science, practice, policy making, but also geographically speaking, we encouraged Open Think Tank Network sister grassroots think tanks to embark on the journey together with us. And we have partnered with the Kenya-based non-for-profit Pan-African youth organization, the Youth Café. Process, but the framing of the topic as well as the setup of the entire process has actually effort where more than dozens of highly engaged volunteers from our sister think tank Agora in the UK, Foraus here in Switzerland, Polis 180 in Germany, Ponto from Austria, and the Youth Café from Kenya, created or framed the topic bottom up and created the process. We kickstarted the strategic foresight process by actually creating 5 fictional characters or personas, that's how we call them, in different situations and with different needs in a close group. So in this coordination team, and we had help by creatives, it's a design strategy company. By creating personas, our aim was actually to open up an explorative space and facilitate access into future migration scenarios, not only for people from the field. And then in the next step, we invited anyone interested, whether professionally involved in the topic of migration or foresight, or really just an individual looking to increase expertise on the subject, to join a series of 3 workshops. The first workshop took place on March 2nd, where over 60 highly engaged participants from actually around the world discussed the drivers of change, which might possibly impact the migratory journey or the fictive migratory journey of this persona. Then on May 31st, we met again for a 3-hour interactive workshop to collaboratively explore possible futures for those personas, taking into account how the different drivers and megatrends might influence their journey or situation. Now on May 4th, so a week from now, we have our last workshop where we ideate on policy actions to be taken in order for those visions to come true or to avoid their coming true. After that, our workshop, or like our public workshop series ends, but participants are also invited to join the process of actually making sense of the idea which we came up with in the past month. So over the summer month, we plan to write a policy recommendation outlining the collaboratively ideated policy actions, as well as the learnings of the process, targeting then decision makers and organization with the hope to help them to become more agile and adapt in a more proactive than reactive way, also something Emily already mentioned a bit. And then in addition, we also want to create a mockcast or podcast where short fictional personal stories about human mobility are read out by different people, which makes it more easy to emphasize with those stories and also more accessible to not only decision makers. So our way a bit to communicate to people from not necessarily the field. And also this idea has already broadly been mentioned by Emily. We are in uncertain times. We have always been in uncertain times, and probably, or it's said more often that now it's especially uncertain. But while some people try to predict the future, foresight is not at all about that. The future doesn't exist, it hasn't happened, and it will not unfold in a predetermined way. Therefore, we also think we should use those, like the most useful way to think about the future is to think of it as landscapes of possibilities. And This might not be necessarily a mind-blowing idea, but it's a really powerful thought, because once we begin to think about the future as an array of possibilities to be navigated as time goes by, we can actually scan the environment and to look for those weak signals or signals of change or seeds of what may be forthcoming. We can then decide to actually water those seeds or remove the weeds and begin to garden change in a constructive way today. And this is what we actually aim for at Foraus. With this being said, I will hand over to Andrina, who is co-heading our migration program at Foraus and is part also of this coordination team around the Future of Human Mobility Challenge, who will outline for you why participatory strategic foresight is important for migration. And we will take questions after Andrina's input on this project and the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wailea, and also Emily, for your previous intervention. I mean, we didn't coordinate on all the aspects, but I think we can see that there is much overlap from what you were saying and what we're also experiencing now in our process. As Wailea said, I will talk a little bit about why strategic foresight can be a relevant method, especially in the field of migration, just as one example, of course. And then also I would like to share a few experiences we've made so far. So policymakers and politicians, they want to know what's coming. What will the future bring, and how can it best be anticipated? Before looking more closely into the area of migration, I would like to briefly distinguish between two concepts, forecast and foresight. Forecasts produce a quantitative estimate of future migration. Quantitative means that the approach relies on numerical data that has been collected systematically and regularly over time. Estimate means that there is uncertainty involved, which ideally is measured as well. But it is exactly that uncertainty, and we've heard that before, or better, how to address it, that is particularly interesting and might be a key aspect to produce better migration policies. Of course, the numbers are important, and many politicians are looking at are the numbers rising or declining, but as we all know, migration is not just about them. Therefore, what we're looking in the process Wailea just outlined are not the forecasts, but exactly foresights. Foresights, and we've also heard that, are often also called scenarios or visions. They are qualitative narratives about the future of migration that emphasize possible structural changes and their consequences for migration. It is a what-if approach, or how Wailea called it, a landscape of possibilities. Scenarios don't claim to become real. Rather, they aim to be plausible and push experts and policymakers to think outside the box. So, but why does it seem important when looking at the phenomenon of migration? Migration is among the highly controversial political issues in pretty much every country. The promise of quick fixes and sometimes radical policies helps to gain votes. It often plays with people's fears and insecurities, such as job loss, social decline, identity loss, or alienation. Most politicians think in 4-year cycles, and policymakers struggle to promote longer-term visions. Additionally, migration is multi-sectoral and depends on a variety of factors, drivers, and megatrends. It cannot be looked at in isolation, yet this is precisely what is often done. However, over the last couple of years, we were able to witness that exactly these short-term and, if I'm honest, sometimes very short-sighted policies fail over and over again, I think especially in the European context. We therefore see merit in approaches for migration that try to imagine long-term visions and plausible ways on how to get there, or also on how to avoid them. So you can go in both directions. With Foresight, we can imagine positive and negative scenarios that could happen in the future alike. Often, as a politician, you get more credit for reacting to a crisis rather than to prevent something from potentially happening. I mean, how can you prove afterwards that it was thanks to your policy that it didn't happen? Still, by being able to showcase and illustrate compelling scenarios, this might also raise the political appetite for preventive strategies. It provides policymakers and politicians with concrete and tangible images and stories and lays the ground to develop policies accordingly. Last but not least, the current pandemic has shown enormous consequences for migration and human mobility around the world. So it is a good time to take stock of where we are at the moment and where we might head to in the future. While international travel has considerably been slowed down, the effects on migrants and refugees in situations of vulnerability are yet to be fully evaluated, and adequate responses need to be found. So with the strategic foresight, we try to push participants, as Wailea said, experts. Sometimes they're just interested thinkers, some are just listeners. We try to push them to overcome the traditional way of thinking and to look beyond the obvious reality that is right in front of us. Through the participatory approach and the inclusion of a grassroots community, we took an important step to also enlarge the crowd of people talking about and imagining the future of migration. So it is not just designated delegates or diplomats from a country that talk about it. These people rather speak about their own experiences, their aspirations, and also insecurities. Thanks to our partnership with other European think tanks, as well as the Youth Cafe in Kenya, which has really an African-wide, we managed to have extremely valuable partners on board, something that is often even hard to obtain in the context of the United Nations, where technically all countries are represented. So although being an extremely passionate process, we can also witness the challenges that go along with the strategic foresight method. Let me highlight just a few. To put it boldly, one of the key limitations of foresight are the experts or participants themselves. Participants bring their own cognitive biases, meaning their very own idea of what is real and what isn't, of what is thinkable and what isn't. So the first difficulty is to find some common ground for a discussion. Moreover, it proves to be really challenging to think in categories that are not immediately perceived as realistic or feasible. I think we're really trained to structure it in a way where we can immediately say, so how can it be done? To push participants to go beyond what they know or currently imagine is tough, but if you manage, it's ultimately very rewarding and also quite fun. Another limitation is, and there I try to close the circle with the dilemma many politicians face, is that scenarios often aren't of timely use to policymakers that need or want to make decisions now. While it is interesting and stimulating to consider different future scenarios, there is a risk that it provides less action-oriented advice. So trying to find the right balance between these bold, forward-looking visions and policy recommendations that are nonetheless rooted in realistic terrain is definitely one of the key challenges that we have faced so far in our process. So I'm very happy to share additional insight in case someone from the audience is interested, but I think I would leave it at that for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andrina and Wailea as well, for sharing more about Foraus' project and the one you are leading, especially. Maybe for those who would be interested in joining for the last workshop, because there's one more left, I believe. Perfect. Does anybody have a reaction, a question to what has been said? Okay, otherwise I suggest we move on maybe with the second part of our session. So thanks again to our three speakers. I hope you will be able to stay with us for this last little activity. So it was very insightful to hear more about strategic foresight, more theoretically and applied in your different fields. Thanks a lot for that. So we now want to give you, so to all of you who are listening, the opportunity to try out strategic foresight yourself. And for this, we propose to you to play a game called The Thing from the Future, which has been designed by the Situation Lab. For this, I will share my screen. Okay, so this game is an imagination game. Its purpose is to come up with the most entertaining and thought-provoking descriptions of hypothetical objects from different near, medium, and long-term futures. So to do this, you can rely on 4 types of cards: arc, terrain, I don't know if you see my mouse, then the third one, object, and mood cards. So the first type of card, arc, broadly describes different kind of possible futures or trajectories that our societies could take. So here in this example, we have collapse, meaning that the economy, population, natural resources, etc., would have collapsed. And as you can maybe read at the bottom of the card here, the time frame for this example is a century. The second type of card, terrain, describes the area or field in which your thing from the future will have an impact. So it can be either physical or conceptual. Here in this example, we have health. Then the third type of card, object, describes the basic form that your thing from the future will take. So here, mask. And finally, the last type of card, mood, describes the emotion that the thing from the future triggers for you. So based on a prompt, on a series of cards like this, your task will be to imagine a thing from the future. So it can either be a very concrete object, like here we have mask, and this depends on this object card and on your imagination, of course. Here's an example that I prepared for you. In the next century, the number of people suffering from migraines has risen dramatically because of sudden weather changes due to climate change. This eye mask, made out of organic cotton and powerful plant extracts, helps mitigating weather changes as a cause of migraine and improves the lives of people suffering from it. So as you see from this simple example, I try to, to integrate all of the different elements on those cards in my thing from the future. So this eye mask, so it's in the field of, it's going to have an impact in the field of health. It's in the broad field of collapse because it's related to climate change, and it should trigger hope as it's going to improve the lives of people. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. In case you do, you can click on the top right of your screen. You should see a little square on which you can click it, join the moderation panel and ask your question. And in case you don't, you can ask them anytime, but in case you don't, I suggest that you try yourself to imagine your own thing from the future based on this new prompt. So I suggest you describe it, or you can draw it as well if you prefer, whatever you like. It should have an impact in the field of agriculture. The object itself that you'll have to imagine is a bottle, and it should trigger happiness for you. So in case this is clear for you, I'll let you use your imagination, try to think out of the box, and don't be shy because there cannot be anything wrong. There are only good answers. So I give you a few minutes to think about it, to imagine your own think from the future, and then hopefully some of you will agree to share it with us by clicking on this button on the upper right side, and sharing your ideas with us.
Maybe Fanny, the results can actually be shared in the chat as well. I mean, if you have done your little text, feel free to just share it in the chat, and we can see the results and maybe discuss them.
Absolutely, the panelists are also very welcome to play along and to comment on the ideas. Maybe I'll share with you the example once again so that you are clear with what to do. So this is the example, which includes all 4 categories and the new series we are proposing to you. Hi, Henning.
I do wonder, should I invent a specific bottle because the object is already listed? Okay.
Yes, so I mean, feel free to do whatever you like, but the idea would be to imagine a specific type of bottle, or if you have something more conceptual, feel free to do so as well. There is no boundaries. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I'm thinking that looks.
As Fanny said, you can also draw it if you feel like you need to not type with the keyboard for a bit.
So this object should be useful in 100 years in a world that has collapsed, should have an impact in the field of agriculture, and it should be a source of happiness somehow.
Participant actually sharing a bottle. Marika, do you want to present it? Do you want to join the plenary, or shall I just read it out? If you want to join, you can click the button on the right, as Fanny explained.
Oh, no, here you go. Hi.
Hi, Marika.
Hi, I'm Marika Pecher. Most of you know me because I'm also with Foraus. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for your interesting input. I thought I'd come up with a bottle that manages to purify the infected water over the years destroyed by all the pesticides, and the bottle makes this water pure and fresh for people to be able to drink it again. So a source of happiness and hope for everyone. That would be my ideal idea.
That sounds amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing, Marika. That's great. And I think it's going to be definitely useful in 100 years. Would anyone like to read this?
Henning, also, I saw you also posted your idea, and you're already on the panel. Would you want to share with us what your idea is?
I have to admit that I felt slightly constrained by the choice of or the prompt that was there, because it's so obvious that in a bleak future where water is scarce, you would need something like Marika has just proposed. So that's absolutely perfect. So I thought about something else, and I said, maybe in the future where water is scarce, spirits, alcohol, whiskey is also scarce, and so having a bottle of single malt is a highly cherished asset, and you'd have to hide it away somehow. So having a bottle that looks ordinary to the outside but contains that specific bottle which is certified as being old single malt is something that you can keep for happier days, because you can trade it for your life in any conflict situation.
Thanks so much for sharing. That's really interesting and out of the box, definitely. So I think you're not that optimistic about the future.
I'm not.
You have to fight to keep your miles. And we have one more from Cindy. Would you like to join us as well, Cindy? Hi, Cindy.
Hello. Thank you all very much for the interesting insights and approaches. It's pretty much self-explanatory. I thought of what can you pack in a bottle that isn't maybe liquid. And I thought with pollution and kind of people living in cities increasing, it might be worth to have some fresh Swiss mountain air to be shipped elsewhere. And yeah, would be nice for people to smell the fresh grass. And there it's kind of where agricultural machines come in. And yeah, but really nice experiment that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to you for sharing, Cindy. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that I've heard about these kind of things already. No, you can buy. I think you can buy maybe in China Swiss air in bottles or something like that. It's a bit crazy. I hope we won't go. That the future won't go that bad. But thanks a lot for sharing, Cindy. We have maybe just enough time. So thanks a lot, everybody, for sharing your great ideas. It's really cool to see that with a prompt like that with four different conditions, you managed to come up with very different ideas. It's very cool. So we don't have much time left, but maybe just enough for me to share another prompt, quite a different one with you, and see what to come up with this one. So this one, you can still see my screen, right? Yeah. So this one, the R card is transform, meaning this means an important rupture, a good or bad, whatever, in society, in whatever field. But yeah, a big rupture from the society we know now. That's your task to imagine what. In the field, it's gonna. Your object will be in the field of gender. The object is a bit more abstract this time, so that we can experiment with something less concrete. So it's going to be a ritual, and what it triggers for you is admiration. So I'll leave you 2-3 minutes to think about this one. So it's going to be in a society that has profoundly transformed in a generation, something in the field of gender. Can imagine a ritual which triggers admiration. Okay, I see Henning has a suggestion.
I assume in the future where we will see humanity being in question in a certain way, because we more and more have the opportunity to become partly cybernetic, to get replacement parts and improved parts for organs or body parts, that we more or less become only percentual human in the end. So this will be a very interesting conceptual question, religious question, and it will cause a lot of injustice feeling, because first of all, the richer echelons of humanity will savor this possibility. Now, a welcome ritual, a meeting ritual between people could be to simply compare how much of you is already improved. And that, of course, gender has to come in somehow. I could imagine that even like moving along the spectrum of sexual belonging or gender roles that we want to adopt is easier when you can simply replace parts of you that look more male or more female, and so you can actually compare and use this as a status symbol. You know, spend so much money to look more like a diva, if you like. So I can imagine that this is a possibility.
Thanks a lot for sharing, Henning. That's really interesting indeed. Probably reserved for the richest, as you say, but I like the fact that in a generation the boundaries between gender would be a bit more porous. So that's an interesting thought indeed, definitely. Thanks for sharing. We have maybe time for just one more. Does someone has another idea, another ritual from the future that he or she would like to share?
I don't have one off the top of my head on this, but I was thinking more of greetings, because it's obviously changed so much with COVID. So when I first saw this prompt, I was thinking about these sort of norms that we have and rituals around greetings, and trying to wrap that around the gender one as well. So that was as far as I got on that level. Thank you.
Oh, thanks to you. That's really interesting indeed. Yeah, greetings already changing, and I can imagine that it will continue after COVID. Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Does anyone has anything else to share? A question?
Maybe I can just add to what you were saying, Emily, because interestingly, in the very traditional way, in the French part of of greeting. The men-to-men greeting is different than the women-to-men greeting. So men-to-men would shake hands, whereas women-to-men would give 3 kisses. So that's actually really interesting. I think somehow we could put the gender part in there without redoing the thing, but it's very interesting thought.
And this demonstrates how collaboration and foresight is so essential. You need to talk and to talk about things. You can't just do it on your own. So that's great. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the input, Maria. So I'll stop sharing. Okay, so I suggest we stop here. I want to thank all participants again for your willingness to play this game. It's really cool that some of you agreed to share your very cool ideas with us. So as you see, it's quite a simple game, but it allows us to imagine different possible futures, different artifacts, to be better prepared, or maybe even to come up with promising ideas that will allow us to cope with future challenges. Let's see. I want to thank a lot again all of our 3 speakers for their participation and very insightful inputs. From your messages, I really gather that strategic foresight is about agency. It really talks about our ability to shape the future, to talk about future in the plural, to become more resilient and anticipate better as well, which is a very good thought to have, I think, especially in more troubled times. It was really great as well to hear about more about applications, I would say, of strategic foresight in the Future of Human Mobility project that Wailea and Andrina are working on, and also the fact that it would allow us to look beyond the election cycles and to have a longer term vision. And since this type of work is getting more and more popular, maybe we can have a stronger impact with that in the political world. So lots of food for thought, lots of very interesting inputs. So thanks again, Emily, thanks Wailea, and thanks Andrina. Thank you, OTT, for hosting us today. Thanks to all participants who have joined us for your attention and your participation. That's it for me. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you to all those of you who have shared their contacts. And stay tuned about the project of GCSP, the ones of foraus. There are lots of things happening in different organizations in the field of strategic foresight. So yeah, that was it. Thanks a lot, everybody.